Welcome to the Psychology of Wealth. I'm Dr. Kende Thomas. This isn't another channel about getting rich overnight. It's about understanding why some people build lasting wealth, why others spend an entire life chasing it. Every week, we're going to challenge the way you think about money, success, retirement, business, and legacy. Because I have learned something after decades of working with families, entrepreneurs, professionals, and retirees. The biggest financial problem most people have isn't a lack of money, it's the way they think about money. If we can change your thinking, your decisions begin to change. When your decisions change, your future changes. Say, imagine two people, and I want you to imagine this with me. One earns $70,000 a year, the other earns maybe $100,000 a year. 10 years later, the first person has almost zero debt, owns a home, has investments, has an emergency fund, and their children are prepared for college. Retirement is on track. The second person makes a whole lot more money, but guess what? Lives in a bigger house, drives more expensive cars, has a beautiful lifestyle, and of course, is all on social media, yet they are drowning in debt. They have credit card debt. They have business loans. They have car payments. They are stressed, sleepless nights, and as a matter of fact, they are making more, but they are what? They are building less. So here is my question. Who understood money better? Most people immediately point to income. But income isn't the answer though. You see, the answer precisely is what we call decisions. That's where the answer is. And that's why I want to challenge you today, because I believe we've been asking the wrong questions our entire life. We've asked, how do I make more money? Which is the very common question. When perhaps we should have been asking a different question altogether. How do I make better financial decisions? That should be the question. There's a huge difference between all of this. You see, one changes your paycheck, the other changes your life. Paycheck, life. You know what's fascinating? Over the years, I have sat across the table from people in different situations, different walks of life. Teachers, business owners, engineers, retirees, and medical professionals, okay? Small business owners. Some earn modest incomes and some earn extraordinary incomes. One thing become very, very clear, as I see with all these people, income alone never told me who should become financially secure. I don't go by that anymore. I go by behavior. Behavior did. That realization changed how I think about money myself, and today, I hope it changes how you think about money too. Now, the lie that nobody ever questions, and it should be questioned. Let's talk about the biggest financial lie. Most of us have quietly accepted this lie. It sounds absolutely harmless. In fact, it's repeated so often that we rarely stop to even question it. The lie is this: if I just made more money, all my financial problems will disappear. Think about that for a moment. How many times have you said that? How many times have you heard that? If I just got promoted, if only my business grew, if I landed a better job, we have been conditioned to believe that income is the cure. That's how we're conditioned. But here's something worth considering. Why do we hear stories of professional athletes, entertainers, entrepreneurs, lottery winners who earned extraordinary amounts of money, yet they still faced financial difficulties later? Those stories don't prove that earning more is bad. They simply remind us that income alone doesn't guarantee lasting financial security. Money doesn't erase habits at all. It often just magnifies habits. If someone manages money wisely before a raise, that raise can accelerate their progress. If someone struggles with financial decisions. Before a raise, a larger income is simply create a larger versions of the same challenges. That's why people say more money, more problem. That's why I believe wealth is less about arithmetic than the way people think. It's about behavior. You see, what if your income has never been your biggest problem? Yes, you watching me. What if the real issue has been the way you've been taught to think about money? You see, that thought changed my life completely. And it might change yours too. So that takes me to the fact that wealth is built in the mind before it's seen in the bank. You see, if I ask you a question, have you ever met someone who was incredibly intelligent, yet they constantly struggled every single time financially? I know a lot of them. I'm talking about people with degrees, successful careers, high incomes, talented, hardworking, yet they always seem to be under pressure financially. Now, let me ask you another question. Have you ever met someone with very little formal education who quietly built an extraordinary life, no flashy lifestyle, no expensive cars to impress strangers, no need to prove anything, just steady progress? What explains the difference? If intelligence alone created wealth, the smartest people will always become the wealthiest. But life doesn't work that way because wealth is not simply an IQ problem, it's often a behavioral problem. Think about it. Every day we make financial decisions. Some are small, some are life-changing: buying a car, choosing a house, saving, investing, taking on a debt, protecting the family, planning for retirement, building a business. This decision really happen in a vacuum. They're influenced by fear, hope, pride, pressure, comparison, patience. That's why I call this series the psychology of wealth. Because before money ever reaches your bank account, it passes through your mind first. Imagine two people walking in the same luxury car dealership. One person sees a reward, the other sees a responsibility. One asks, what would the monthly payment be? The other asks, how will this decision affect my long-term goals? Same car, same dealership, completely different psychology. Here's what I've learned. The wealthy don't necessarily ask better financial questions because they're wealthy. Many become wealthy because they learn to ask better questions. Instead of asking, can I afford it? They ask, what will this cost me 5 years from now? Instead of asking, how much money can I make? They ask, what kind of life am I trying to build? Those are very different questions, and different questions often lead to different decisions. There's another trap that almost everyone falls into: comparison. Social media has made it easier, to compare your life with somebody else's life. They highlight the reels. You see vacations, luxury cars, designer clothes, beautiful homes, and your mind quietly whispers, I need to catch up. But here's something worth thinking about though. You rarely see the balance sheet behind the photography. You don't see the debt, the stress, the financial issues, perhaps the discipline that came from before the success. The picture doesn't tell the whole story. Be careful not to compare your everyday life to someone else's selected moments. Comparison has stolen more financial peace than inflation ever has. One of the greatest lessons I've learned throughout my career is this: financial freedom isn't about impressing strangers. It's about creating choices for your family. That's a completely different definition of success. Because wealth isn't just measured by what you can buy, it's also measured by what you no longer have to worry about. Think about that. When your emergency fund is in place, you sleep quietly and very differently. When your loved ones are protected, you think differently. When your retirement has a plan, you breathe differently. Those things don't always show up on social media, but they show up in your quality of life. So today, I want you to challenge you. I want to challenge you not to chase more money. I want you to begin chasing better decisions, because if your thinking improves, your decisions improve. If your decisions improve, your habits improve. If your habits improve, your future begins to change. You see, consistency is where your lasting wealth is built. You will be consistent. You see, I'm going to share a lot of things with you that I need to really pay attention to. Like, it's not about products, shortcuts, but I want to share the 4 decisions that can shape your financial future. And I want you to look at it from a different perspective. Forget everything you've heard about money for just a few minutes. Forget the stock market, forget interest rates, forget inflation, forget politics, forget who is in the office. Let's just imagine tomorrow morning, every bank account in America reset to a zero. Let's assume that. Every millionaire, every billionaire, every business owner, every teacher, everybody just have to go to zero and start all over again. Now, I want to ask yourself one question. Would the same people become wealthy again? I believe many of them would. 100% they will. Not because they know a secret investments, not because they have a special connections, but because they have developed a pattern of making decisions that compound over a period of time. That's what wealth really is. It's a series of good decisions, repeated consistently over and over again. You see, people often ask me, Dr. Thomas, what's your best investment? I get that regularly. I understand the question, but I think it's the wrong question to ask, because before you invest your money, you invest your thinking. Your beliefs determine your behavior. Your behavior determines your decisions. And your decisions eventually determine your financial life. That's why I don't believe wealth starts in your wallet. No. I believe it starts in your mind. You see, over the years, I've noticed that almost every major financial decision fits into 4 categories. Just 4 of them. And I keep repeating this, it's not products, it's not companies. Just 4 decisions. The first, how will I earn? Not just how much, but how will I earn? Just how. Will you build valuable skills? Will you create a business? Will you increase your expertise? See, income is important, but sustainable income usually follows sustained value. Ask yourself, what problem do I have? What problem do I solve for other people? That's a good question. The marketplace often rewards people who solve meaningful problems very, very well. The second decision is, how will I protect what I build? Imagine spending 30 years building a beautiful home. Will you leave the doors unlocked every night? No, you probably wouldn't do that. Yet, many people spend their life, the decades, building a financial progress without considering how they will respond if life changed unexpectedly. Protection isn't about fear. It's not about somebody jinxing you. It's about preparation. Whether someone chooses insurance, emergency savings, legal planning, or other safeguards, that depends upon their own circumstances, this simple fact, is this: protect what we've worked so hard to build. And that's the message. The third decision, how will I grow? Money that sits still often loses purchasing power over a long period because of inflation. Growth requires intention. For some people, that may include retirement accounts. For others, that may be businesses, real estates, broadly diversified investments, or continuing education. You see, the important point isn't that everyone chooses the same path. It's that growth usually requires a plan. That's exactly how this works. Finally, the fourth decision, the one almost nobody thinks about early enough. How will I transfer what I build? I want you to think about that for a second. I spent 30-something years building something. Have you also spent time thinking about what happens next? Legacy isn't reserved for billionaires. Every family leaves something behind. Sometimes it's a financial security. Sometimes you're leaving bills, debts behind. Sometimes you're leaving wisdom. Sometimes you're leaving confusion. The question isn't whether you will leave a legacy. The question is, what kind of legacy will you leave? This is a critical junction. Imagine your children or your grandchildren sitting around a table one day, having a conversation. They're talking about you. What story would they tell about you? Will they say, he left us or she left us a lot of money? Or he or she taught us how to think? Because if you teach someone how to think, You've given them something that can't be taken away from them forever. It's theirs. I believe that's the highest form of wealth. Not what you own, but what you actually pass on. And that's why this series exists. Not to tell you what stock to buy, not to promise overnight success, not to sell you the latest financial trend. This series exists because I believe one better decision made consistently over many years can completely change the direction of a family, not just financially, generationally. So tonight, before you go to sleep, I want you to ask yourself one question. Which of these four decisions deserves more of my attention right now at this moment? Is it earning? Is it protecting? Is it growing? Or is it transferring? And write it down. Be very clear about it, because awareness is the first step towards change. And change begins with a decision. In our next episode, we're going to explore one of the most dangerous beliefs in modern society. Why so many people spend lives chasing a higher salary, without ever building real financial freedom. But until then, I want you to remember this. Your future is really shaped by one dramatic moment. Your future is shaped by thousands of ordinary decisions that you make, but you made them consistently. And I want to thank you for spending this time with me. You didn't have to, but you made it to the end of this video. If this conversation challenged the way you think, not just what you know, I invite you to subscribe and join me next week for another episode of The Psychology of Wealth. Until next time, keep thinking differently.